Welcome to the Frequency Labyrinth. I am Adrienne McDonald, your host. This podcast is for you if you're done with surface level self-help and ready for something deeper and actually transformative. Around here, we work with ancient wisdom, human design, gene keys, and shamanic practices, not as knowledge to collect, but as tools to live by. This isn't about one size fits all. It's about learning to work with your energy, your design, and your life. This is about integration and embodiment. We go deep here with ancient wisdom, practical integration, so that you can develop ironclad self-trust. Let's get into it. Hello, beautiful humans, and welcome back to the Frequency Labyrinth. I gotta tell you, what's been living in the back of my mind as I've been putting this episode together, because I think it's actually the reason this topic wanted to come through right now. The Artemis crew has been making the journey around the moon, humans going back to the moon, around the moon at least. And if you've been here for any length of time, you know that I am unabashedly a space nerd. Something about it just cracks me open every single time. And I've been watching and holding my breath and hoping with everything I have that they return to the Earth safely, which, when this episode drops, will be today. I keep coming back to this particular type of awe that I really don't have another word for. It's the awe of watching humans aim themselves at something that enormous and just go. Because what strikes me about space exploration every time is that it requires two things working together simultaneously that usually don't pair up. You got to know the math and the physics and the trajectory and the conditions that you're going to be moving through with extraordinary precision. But you also have to trust something that you can't fully calculate, because there's always that moment where the humans in the capsule are in the hands of something larger than themselves. And they know that, and they go anyway. And not in spite of it, but in full awareness of it. And that combination, knowing your terrain and trusting the larger intelligence you're moving through, is what I want to get into today, because it's that combination that sits at the heart of what astrology is actually asking us to do. And it brings me to a concept that shows up in more traditional astrological circles, not as much in pop astrology world, and that concept is the natal promise. Now, that doesn't have the viral quality to say that your coffee order is wrong because of Mercury retrograde or big anger issues because of your Mars placement. And I think some of it is because it sounds like a limitation, the natal promise, like something that narrows you before you've even had a chance to choose. But I want to spend the episode sort of sitting inside that phrase, because I think once you understand what it's actually pointing at, it doesn't close anything. It orients you. And the orientation, when you've been genuinely walking without it, is one of the most useful, practical things that you can have coming out of another spiritual tool set. So let's go back a bit. Before we go any further, I want to say something, because this episode goes into territory that's a little bit more technical than usual, and I think context matters. I've said on the podcast before that I'm not an astrologer. And I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and we were talking about decans, and she looks at me, she's, you got to stop saying that. And she's right. So let me be a little bit more precise about what I actually mean. I have formal training in astrology. I've studied it for years, self-study, and then I've done years of formal training. I have formal training in human design and gene keys and Celtic shamanism. What I practice isn't just a standalone discipline. It's all of them read together, woven in to each other, treated as different languages describing the same underlying patterns. So when I say I'm not an astrologer, what I mean is I'm not a traditional astrologer doing traditional astrology readings. I'm not handing you a classical delineation and sending you on your way. I'm reading the whole field, the chart, the design. The energetic mechanics is one conversation. So that is what I meant by that. Also, I want to say something about why I think this particular conversation is urgent right now, because I don't think it's an accident that people are hungry for it, because I see this out in the world. We're living in a moment where it's never been easier to borrow someone else's life plan, to look at what's working for someone in your industry or your income bracket or your aesthetic or try to template yourself into a version of that, especially with influence culture. And I think the tools to do that keep getting a little bit more sophisticated, and they even have a personalization feel to them, more convincing that the output that they're handing you is actually about you. And I call something out here from the personal and spiritual development industry that has a real accountability problem around this. The way it has commodified the idea of becoming. The courses, the masterminds, the signature frameworks, the 6-figure blueprints, the I cracked the code and now I'm going to sell it to you energy. So much of it is built on the premise that there is a universal path to successful, abundant, aligned life. And if you just buy the right map, follow the right steps, embody the right frequency, you'll arrive there. And the message underneath all of it is the one that nobody says out loud, but like everyone absorbs, is that if you haven't arrived, the problem is you. Your mindset, your resistance, your limiting beliefs, your inability to receive. And I think at times that's not just unhelpful, it's harmful, because it takes what is fundamentally a terrain problem, you trying to walk someone else's path through someone else's landscape, and turns it into, I don't know, character flaw. And people are tired, not from not trying hard enough, but from trying very hard in a direction that was never actually theirs, and then being handed another tool to try still harder still. And underneath all that borrowing, there's this question that keeps surfacing, sometimes loudly, sometimes as like a low hum that you can almost ignore if you stay busy enough. And that question is, what is actually mine? Not what should I want, not what looks good from the outside, like not what the algorithm rewards or the mastermind promises. And let me say that, frameworks and systems and masterminds, and I've done those. I've been in a lot of them. I think they can be helpful if they are the right fit for you. But first, you got to look at, what does my life look like when I stop trying to fit into someone else's framework and start walking the terrain I was actually given. And that is the question the natal promise is answering, and why I think this conversation belongs to right now. Because once you have that awareness, then you can go out to any of these systems and go, you know what, that's going to work for me. Or, that's not going to work for me. So in Hellenistic astrology, the tradition that gave us much of what we think of as Western astrology, the birth chart was not treated as a personality quiz. It was not a map of who you are in a way that we tend to mean it now. And again, I'm not discounting modern evolutionary astrology, etc. You sort of looked at it and said, okay, yeah, that's me. I'm an intense Scorpio who feels everything too deeply and can't let things go. That framing is a little bit more modern, where it's not without value. It's a pretty significant departure from where the ancients were actually doing when they were looking at things. And here's something that genuinely lives in the ancient technical language of the Hellenistic tradition, and I've heard my teachers point towards. The actual Greek word for that's used for how the planets interact with each other and the life of the person born is testimony. It's witnessing. The planets in the Hellenistic framework were not primarily describing your psychology, they were testifying. It was positioned more like a witness in a legal proceeding than your personality archetypes, bearing record of the life from an external vantage point. Not you are this, but here is what's true about you. Now, let me preface by saying where I'm about to go here is where the technical historical record ends and where my interpretation begins, because I don't want to put words in the mouths of ancient astrologers that they didn't say. The testimony language in Hellenistic astrology is technically about how the planets relate to each other within the chart and whether the planet can see another, whether it testifies on the back half of certain areas of life. That's the precise doctrine. But what I find in the language, what I think it's pointing at underneath the technical mechanics is something larger. Because when you're in a court of law, a witness doesn't make up things. Well, I guess they could, but they're not supposed to. A witness is supposed to testify to what is true. A witness bears record of what is actually present, what is actually real. And if the planets are in the role of witnesses at the moment of your birth, what they're witnessing is a quality of the moment, the nature of the time you entered, the particular pattern of the cosmos at the exact second your life began. And that implies something. It implies that the moment of your birth wasn't arbitrary, that there is an order, a coherence, an intelligence running through reality that was present when you arrived and had something to say about it. So isn't that incredible? I feel like your natal chart is a record of a conversation that you were already in with the universe, and it took a snapshot. I think that, so when I say the map of the sky made at the moment you arrived is a record, it's a record of a conversation already in progress between you and the cosmos. That's my read. That's what I hear underneath the testimony language, underneath the fate and fortune framework, underneath the philosophical worldview that made Hellenistic astrology coherent in the first place. That leads me directly to the natal promise, not as a ceiling, not as a verdict handed down before you could object, but as a testimony, a record of what's true about the pattern of life you were born into, and within that pattern, what is genuinely, specifically, inherently available to you. There are seeds in your chart, pathways that have real traction in your particular terrain. And there are other things, no matter how hard you work or how much you want them, are going to feel like pushing a car uphill that was never part of your route. And that's not a sad thing. That can be incredibly liberating, but we'll get there. So let's talk about the big three. When most people come to astrology, the first thing they learn is their sun sign. Maybe they also learn their moon and their rising. That's what we call the big three. And they are treated more as nuanced personality descriptions, like the slightly more sophisticated version of the horoscope that used to run in the back of magazines. Oh, I'm a Scorpio sun, Cancer moon, Capricorn rising. I'm actually a Aries sun, Cancer rising, Pisces moon. But you could look at it and go, well, no wonder why I'm emotionally intense, but also weirdly ambitious and kind of a lot at parties, which is fine. And it's not entirely wrong, but it's also a really narrow look at what these placements are actually doing. So if we stay in the frame of the planets or witnesses, the sun, moon, and rising are describing three fundamentally different dimensions of your lived experience, three lenses which the testimony of your life is being rendered, and understanding them this way gives you something useful. More useful than maybe just a personality label could ever. So the sun in modern astrology gets flattened to your identity, your ego, your personality, and there is something true in that. It misses the animistic quality of the sun. The fact that in ancient cosmology, the sun was not just a symbol, but like a living source of vitality and direction. The sun in your chart is not just telling you who you are in some fixed sense. It's pointing at the direction your life force wants to move. It's the animating principle of your becoming, because the sun is about becoming and not just about being. And I think that you have to understand that you grow into your sun placement over time. It's less about who you started out, about more of who you are in the process of returning to, being a much more fuller expression of through your choices, your actions, and really the full arc of your life. And the moon is where things get a little bit more intimate, and it's not just your emotions, though emotions are a part of it. It's your body, your rhythms, your nervous system. It's the way you experience safety and the way you return to yourself when the world gets loud. It's the witness that testifies how your life feels from the inside, and not necessarily what you think about your experience, not how you narrate it, but how it lands in your body, in your gut, in the place before words. A lot of frustration people feel between the who they think they are and how they actually respond to life is in that like sun-moon tension. And the sun is pointing to you about what you want to become, and the moon is describing how your system is wired to process and feel it. And when those two are in real dialogue, when you can honor the trajectory and the terrain, I feel like something clicks. Then there's your rising, the ascendant. This is where the context of the natal promise gets a little bit more interesting. It's not just how other people perceive you, which is the shorthand. It's the point of contact between you and the world, the moment-to-moment interface through which your entire chart expresses itself into lived reality. It shapes the actual texture of the experiences that you encounter, the kinds of people, the circumstances in your life tend to attract. And it's the lens through which everything else in your chart is filtered as it moves through real time. And when you put the three together, you're not just stacking personality descriptions, you're describing like an architecture of experience, the direction of your life force is moving, the body and rhythmic systems experiencing the journey, and the interface through which the journey is making contact with reality. And that's a much more useful map, especially with all what houses and where things are pulling focus. That's a much more useful map than I'm intense and ambitious and kind of a lot in parties. And the natal promise pushed back against something that's gotten really deeply embedded in the personal development space. It's a particular flavor of manifestation culture that teaches that reality is infinitely malleable in all the directions if you apply the right combination of intention, visualization, and aligned action. Now, there's a lot of nuance here. Intention matters. Your choices shape your life. I'm not arguing against that. What I'm pushing back on is the specific claim that everything is equally available to everyone at all times. Because there's a lot of people out there trying to manifest shit that it's going by somebody else's plan. And you could get them to talk about it and they would swear that they really, really want it. And it's almost like they're trying to prove themselves that they want X, whatever X is. Again, I think this goes back to a lot to like influence or culture. But again, what I'm pushing back on is that specific claim, because that persistent friction, in some regards, people say that the persistent friction is simply evidence of a mindset problem. That if something isn't working because your thoughts aren't correctly aligned, or your energy isn't high enough, or your limiting beliefs are still in the way. And I get that, because on the surface that can sound empowering, but it also doesn't tell the whole truth. Terrain exists. It's real. It's not a mindset problem. It's a specific shape of the life you were born into. It has texture, it has gradients, it has places where the soil is rich and things grow easily, and places where you will work twice as hard for half the result. That is not a failure of your visualization practice. That is the landscape. When we come into this lifetime, we are here for specific reasons, and those reasons are here for, as I've said on the podcast many times, soul evolution, contribute back to the collective in some meaningful way. And that can manifest many, many, many different ways. But your natal promise is going to give you some insight into that. Your natal promise, properly understood, does not remove your agency. It grounds your agency in reality. It says, here's the terrain you're actually walking. Here's where the traction is. Here's where things can actually build. And here's where you're going to need a little bit more honesty about what you're trying to do and why. That is not limitation. That is orientation. And when I look at this when I bring in a different tradition here, because I think it adds something that astrology alone doesn't quite reach. In shamanic practice, there's an understanding that you're not a separate self moving through a neutral environment that you can shape at will. You're in relationship with a living field. The world around you is not just stuff, not just matter arranged in configurations waiting for you to impose meaning on it. It is alive. It's relational. There are seen and unseen forces, patterns of energy, threads of lineages, agreements of the soul, if you will. The way certain things call to you and other things repel to you, those pulls and repulsions, I don't feel like those are random. Those are not just, sometimes they're not just preferences. They're information. They're part of the conversation. The shamanic framework shifts the primary question of your life from how do I get what I want to how do I move in right relationship with what is. And that's a significant shift. Even though there's just a few words difference there, it repositions you from the controller to the participant. And it takes you out of the seat where you're supposed to be forcing reality into compliance and placing you into deeper kind of conversation that was already in progress, where your job is not to dominate the field, but listen and respond to it and learn the rhythms and find the places where you can move with real support rather than fake ass momentum. And that's where the natal promise and shamanic awareness can meet. The chart seen through this lens is a living agreement, a record of the field conditions at the moment that you entered into this reality, the conversation between your soul and a larger intelligence of the cosmos at the moment you arrived. And embedded within that conversation are certain agreements about what this life is for and what you're here to explore and what particular strands of experience were woven into the pattern of it. And some people find that deeply comforting. And some people find it really hard, especially if the terrain of their life has been genuinely painful. And I get that because I grew up in an incredibly chaotic environment. But I want you to sit with that rather than skip over it, because it would be easy to hear that your life has a pattern and the pattern contains a divine intelligence and feel like if your life is included a lot of suffering, that the divine intelligence was either absent or indifferent or even cruel. And I don't think that the shamanic understanding of this is that simple. And I don't think the astrological is simple either. I think that the suffering in some natal charts is it's the kind that forges thing. And the invitation is not to spiritually bypass it by saying everything happens for a reason and then leaving it there. I think a deeper question would be, what is this suffering in relationship with? What is it asking to transform? And what might be on the other side of actually walking through it rather than around it? I feel like that's a more honest and a more demanding question, because the field is not always comfortable. Right relationship with the field is not always ease. It's not a life with no friction. It's about being honest, being present, being willing to respond to what's actually here, rather than spending your energy trying to force into existence something belongs to a different chart, a different terrain, a different conversation entirely. And now this is where I find human design to be one of the more practically useful tools that I've encountered, because it takes a conversation about pattern and terrain and right relationship and makes it a little bit more, I will say, a little differently specific. Because human design is not describing archetypes the way astrology tends to. It's not saying here's the quality of the energy your sun placement embodies. It's saying how your specific energetic system is built and how it's designed to take in and process and respond to life. And here's what happens mechanically, reliably, consistently, if you will, when you operate in alignment with the design versus when you're in your not self. Your type describes how your energy works, how it generates, or projects, or manifests, or reflects. It's telling you something specific about how you're designed to move through life. A generator's energy is built around response. That sacral, that big motor-like center, is what most humans on the planet have defined. It's not designed to chase things through willpower and mental decision-making. And a projector who's trying to initiate, like a manifester, going out and pushing and generating and hustling the way the world typically rewards, is going to hit a wall of bitterness. And I think with reflectors, it's probably the type that suffers the most from a culture that demands consistency and that reliable, stable, presentable identity at full all the time. Because that reflector needs time, needs to wait through that lunar cycle before decisions, needs that quality of environment that actually feeds them. All of this is natal promise expressed through a different language. This is how you are built. This is the terrain of your energy. These are the mechanics. The question is not whether you can override them through willpower. You probably can for a while, but the price is real. Better question is, are you willing to actually work with them? And then I come back to a phrase over and over in my work, reading the cosmic energy mix, because I think that captures what a lot of these systems are actually inviting you to do. They're not inviting you to predict the future in some fixed way. They're not saying that because of your natal promise, this specific thing will happen on this specific date and there's nothing you can do about it. That's not how any of these traditions work, even though they sometimes get flattened into that. Can't control the weather. You can't will a storm to stop because you decided today will be sunny and no amount of visualization or high vibe energy is going to turn down your low pressure system into a clear sky. But you can learn how to read the sky. You can learn how to recognize patterns and textures and the specific quality of light that tells you something is building. You can learn when to plant and when to harvest and when to stay inside and let the storm do what it needs to do. You can learn the difference between resistance that is asking you to refine and resistance that is asking you to stop entirely. This is what your natal chart is for. This is what your human design's for. This is what being in a relationship from a shamanic standpoint is for. Not to make you passive, not to hand you a set of excuses for staying stuck. Although you can use those for that. But it's more about to orient you so precisely within the actual terrain of your life that you stop spending enormous amounts of energy trying to make things happen that are not yours to make happen. That on some soul level, you probably already know, and you start putting that energy finally with real traction towards the things that are. And what I see again and again when I work with people is that they're not failing from lack of effort. You're not stuck because you don't want to change badly enough. I hate that phrase. They're not playing small. I hate that phrase. They're out of relationship with the terrain of their own life. They're spending majority of their energy compensating for that misalignment rather than building from actual alignment. Or probably a better way of saying that, because we can get into the whole alignment conversation. Usually people are in alignment, but they're in alignment with their shadow or they're in alignment with their gift. One of my teachers does not like to use the word misalignment. She actually says we're never out of alignment. I have a different opinion there, because I think if you have profound soul loss or you have profound power loss, you certainly can be out of alignment. But I will agree with, for the most part, you're either operating in the shadow or you're operating in the gift. And when you're operating in the shadow, then you're probably feeling like you're misaligned anyway. But that is just semantics, isn't it? So I feel like when someone stops arguing with their chart and starts listening to it, when they stop pushing against their human design, start working with it, when they start noticing the quality of the field that they're moving through rather than just, doing the hustle, the change in how they experience their life isn't subtle. It is something relaxes that's been clenched for a long time. Now, I know some of what I've said today could be heard as a case for giving up. It's spiritual permission to disengage or stop trying. Well, this is just my natal chart, so I guess I'm off the hook. No, that is not what I said. It's not what any of these traditions are pointing out. You have agency. The question is where that agency is the most effectively applied, because your agency doesn't exist outside of a pattern. It exists within. And the people who know their patterns, who genuinely understand the terrain that they're walking, who have stopped arguing with the river and learned how to navigate it, these are the people that are more effective. Their decisions are cleaner. The timing gets more intuitive. Their energy is not scattered across 100 different directions, half of which were never theirs to begin with. What is true in your chart, the actual natal promise of it, isn't a prison. It is a range. It is the full spectrum of possibility of what is genuinely available within the particular pattern of your life. And the particular conversation that you are constantly in with the universe. And that range includes real choice, real growth, genuine transformation. And some of those transformations are hard won. The chart will tell you that. And some of those are gifts that take the full arc of a lifetime to develop. But they are yours. And they actually have traction. And they have real roots. And they have real staying power. In a way that maybe borrowed aspirations from someone else's life never quite do. The Gene Keys tradition, which grows out of human design, talks about the shadow and the gift and the city as three expressions of the same gate. And I find that framework is useful here because it makes explicit what the natal promise is already implying. The same pattern creates the shadow, the contracted, reactive fear expression of your design. Is the identical pattern that contains the gift and ultimately the transcendent expression of it. You're not working against your natal promise to reach your potential. You're working through it. And that is a completely different relationship to have with your own nature. The real invitation inside the natal promise, inside astrology, inside human design, and inside even within a shamanic lens is not limitation, and it's not infinite freedom either. It's participation, and it's actually being in conversation with the intelligence that is moving through your life, rather than spending that life trying to dominate or escape it or optimize it. And I don't think that when the Hellenistic astrologers said that the planets were witnesses, they were describing a passive relationship. Witnesses participate in what they're witnessing. They bring their presence, their attention, their testimony to something that's actually needs to be seen in order to be fully recognized as truth. Your life needs to be seen by you with honesty, with the willingness to look at what's actually there rather than what you may wish were there. And when you bring that real, honest attention to the actual testimony of your chart, your design, the field that you're moving through, something becomes possible that wasn't possible before. You stop trying to be somebody else. You start becoming more fully who you already are. You start developing deeper roots of self-trust. And I know that sounds simple, but not simple. And I know it's not easy, because who you are is often in direct conflict with who you've been told you should be. And that conflict is one of the most common sources of exhaustion I see in my work. People who are worn out, not from the difficulty of their life necessarily, but from the effort of trying to be a different person, living a different kind of life than they are actually wired for. I think that sometimes the natal promise is a permission slip. And so when I come back to it, what I'm really asking is, what if you stop treating your chart as evidence that you have to work on yourself and maybe treating it as a record of what's genuinely here for you? And what ancient astrologers are pointing out, that living coherence, they believed, was running through everything. And it's not just about how do I get the universe to give me what I want, but how do I participate more honestly and more skillfully in what's actually here and what's actually mine, and the specific and beautiful and difficult and unrepeatable life that I have been given. So your life isn't random, and it's worth saying plainly and sitting with, especially in a culture that's deeply uncomfortable with the idea that there is a divine order to things. Because if there's an order, there's also meaning. And if there's meaning, there's also something at stake. And that can feel a little bit like pressure. But there's another side of that. If there's order, if there's pattern, if there's intelligence that is present, that was present at the moment of your birth and has been present in every transit, in every progressed season, in every human design season, and every shamanic turn of the wheel, then there's also support in that. And there is a conversation that you can drop into with divine intelligence in the universe at any time. There is a field that knows you, that has always known you, that is not neutral about what happens to you. It's here to support you if you will be in conversation with it. And I feel like the real work, the work that I find worth doing, is learning how to hear that conversation, learning to read the weather, learning to tell the difference between what is genuinely yours and what's borrowed pressure from a culture that does not know your chart. Learning to move with the pattern rather than against it. And then doing so, building something that's really true for you. So if anything in this episode landed for you, if you felt something click or something loosen up and you want to go deeper, you can always book a session with me. And that link is in the show notes. If you found this interesting, please share this episode out. We had a winner picked last week, Anna S., for the free Kairos session for sharing out the episodes with our with the lore contest that we did last month. Thank you very much for all of those shares. Remember to find beauty every day and seek the magic in the mundane. Thanks for tuning in today. As always, take what resonates, leave the rest. Let whatever landed move through you in whatever way it needs to or wants to. And also, if you want to explore more, you'll find more information in the show notes. If this episode stirred something in you, please share it out or leave a quick review. It helps so much and I really appreciate it. And remember, this work is about integration, and it always starts with self-trust.